Imagine this. You're just trying to mind your own business, living your life, when suddenly, a stranger decides to make you the center of their drama. Now, imagine that drama escalates to the point where the police are called on you for no reason other than the color of your skin. Sounds unbelievable, right? But for one man, this wasn't just a hypothetical scenario. It was his reality. This is the story of a black man who was simply closing his driveway gate when a woman, let's call her Karen, decided to take it upon herself to involve the authorities. What she didn't know, though, was that this man had a secret. Something that would turn the tables in a way she never saw coming. It all started on an ordinary afternoon. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and life seemed to be moving at its usual pace. Our main character, let's call him Marcus, had just returned home from running errands. He was tired, ready to unwind, and looking forward to some peace and quiet. But peace was the last thing he was about to get. As Marcus stepped out of his car and began closing the gate to his driveway, he noticed a woman standing across the street. She was staring at him, hard. At first, he thought nothing of it. Maybe she was waiting for someone or just lost in thought. But then, she started walking toward him. Her tone was sharp, her words even sharper. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Marcus was taken aback. He looked around, confused. "I live here," he replied calmly, trying to keep the situation from escalating. But Karen, because, let's be honest, that's who she was, wasn't having it. "I've never seen you before," she snapped. "This is a quiet neighborhood, and we don't just let anyone wander around." Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. "Ma'am," he said, "this is my house. I'm closing my gate because I'm going inside. That's all." But Karen wasn't convinced. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as if she were some kind of neighborhood watch enforcer. "We'll see about that," she muttered, pulling out her phone. Before Marcus could say another word, she was dialing 911. His heart sank. He knew exactly where this was going. He'd seen the videos, heard the stories, and now it was happening to him. The police were on their way, and there was nothing he could do to stop it as they waited for the authorities to arrive. Marcus tried to reason with her. "Look," he said, "I don't want any trouble. I can show you my ID, my mail, anything to prove I live here." But Karen wasn't interested in proof. She had already made up her mind about him, and nothing he said was going to change it. The minutes felt like hours as they stood there in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And then, the sirens. The police arrived, their lights flashing, their presence immediately making the situation feel even more serious. Karen wasted no time. She marched up to the officers, pointing at Marcus like he was some kind of criminal. "That man," she said, her voice loud and accusatory, "was trying to break into that house. I saw him messing with the gate. He doesn't belong here." The officers turned to Marcus, their expressions unreadable. "Sir," one of them said, "can you explain what's going on?" Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew he had to stay calm, but the injustice of it all was almost too much to bear. "Officers," he began, "this is my home. I was closing my driveway gate when this woman approached me, accusing me of trespassing. I've tried to explain, but she won't listen." The officers exchanged a glance, clearly unsure of how to proceed. They asked for his ID, which he handed over without hesitation. As they examined it, Karen stood there, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. She was convinced she had done the right thing, that she had protected her neighborhood from some imaginary threat. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the officers handed Marcus his ID back and turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his tone firm but polite, "this man does live here. There's no issue here." For a moment, Karen looked stunned. Her mouth opened, then closed, like a fish out of water. But before she could respond, Marcus spoke up. "Actually," he said, his voice steady, "there's something you should know." The officers turned to him, curious. Karen's eyes widened, her confidence wavering for the first time. What Marcus revealed next would change everything. But that's a story for the next part. Because just when you think you've got it all figured out, life has a way of throwing you a curveball. And in this case, that curveball was something Karen never could have anticipated. So, what did Marcus tell the officers? What was the secret he had been holding on to? And how did this entire situation take a turn that no one saw coming? Stick around, because this story is far from over. Marcus stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of the officers, Karen, and even a few curious neighbors who had started to gather, all fixed on him. The air was thick with tension, and he knew whatever he said next would change the course of this encounter. But before he could speak, he took a moment to collect himself. This wasn't just about proving he lived there. It was about something much bigger, something that had been brewing for a long time. To understand how Marcus got to this point, we need to rewind a bit. Marcus had moved into this neighborhood about 6 months ago. It was a quiet, tree-lined street with well-kept homes and friendly neighbors, or so he thought. At first, everything seemed fine. He'd wave to people as he left for work, exchange pleasantries at the mailbox, and even helped an elderly neighbor carry her groceries once. But over time, he started to notice the subtle shifts. The way some neighbors would avoid eye contact or quickly look away when he passed by. The way conversations at the community barbecue seemed to die down when he approached. At first, he told himself he was imagining things. But deep down, he knew better. Then there was Karen. She lived a few houses down. And from the moment Marcus moved in, she had been different. Not overtly hostile, but always watching. Always lingering just a little too long when she thought he wasn't looking. She never said much to him directly, but he'd catch her whispering to other neighbors, her eyes darting in his direction. It was unsettling, but Marcus tried to brush it off. He had bigger things to worry about, like his job, his family, and the fact that he was still trying to make this house feel like a home. But today, it all came to a head. Karen's decision to call the police wasn't just about the gate. It was about something deeper, something uglier. And Marcus knew he couldn't let it slide. Not this time. As he stood there, facing the officers and Karen, he realized this was his chance to confront not just her, but the unspoken tension that had been building in the neighborhood. But he also knew he had to be careful. One wrong move, one wrong word, and this situation could spiral out of control. Officers, Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. I appreciate you coming out here, but this isn't just about me closing my gate. This is about something bigger. He paused, choosing his words carefully. This woman has been watching me, questioning me, and making assumptions about me since the day I moved in. And today, she decided to take it to the next level by calling you. But what she doesn't know is that I've been documenting everything. The officers exchanged a glance, clearly intrigued. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she'd been slapped. Her face flushed, and she opened her mouth to protest. But Marcus cut her off. I have security cameras, he continued. They've been recording everything, every interaction, every stare, every moment she spent lurking outside my property. And I've kept a log of every time she's made me feel unwelcome in my own neighborhood. Today was just the final straw. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The officers, now fully engaged, asked Marcus to elaborate. He explained how he had installed the cameras after noticing Karen's behavior, how he had started keeping a journal to document the microaggressions he faced, and how he had even reached out to a local community organization for support. I didn't want it to come to this, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. But I also couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. As Marcus spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The officers, who had initially seemed skeptical, now looked at Karen with a mix of suspicion and disappointment. The neighbors who had gathered began to murmur among themselves, some looking uncomfortable, others nodding in agreement. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to shrink under the weight of the moment. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by a look of uncertainty and maybe even a hint of guilt. But just when it seemed like the tide was turning in Marcus's favor, Karen found her voice. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her tone defensive. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood. How was I supposed to know he lived here? He doesn't exactly fit in. Her words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Marcus felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to lose his temper. This was the time to make his point. And what does fit in mean, exactly? Marcus asked, his voice steady but firm. Does it mean looking a certain way? Acting a certain way? Because if that's the case, then maybe the problem isn't with me. Maybe it's with the people who can't accept that the world is changing, that neighborhoods like this one are becoming more diverse. And maybe, just maybe, it's time for everyone to take a hard look at themselves and ask why they feel so threatened by someone. Who's different? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the officers seemed at a loss for words. Karen, for her part, looked like she wanted to disappear. But before anyone could respond, Marcus dropped one final bombshell. And just so we're clear, he said, pulling out his phone, I've already sent all the footage and my notes to my lawyer. If this continues, I won't hesitate to take legal action. The tension in the air was palpable. The officers, realizing the situation was more complicated than they had initially thought, began to wrap things up. They advised both Marcus and Karen to avoid further confrontation and assured Marcus that they would file a report documenting the incident. As they left, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to be in shock. She muttered something under her breath before turning on her heel and storming off, leaving Marcus standing there, surrounded by neighbors who were now looking at him with a mix of curiosity and respect. But Marcus knew better than to think this was the end. If anything, it was just the beginning. He had taken a stand, but he also knew that standing up to prejudice and discrimination was never easy. There would be backlash. There would be challenges. And there would be more moments like this. Moments where he would have to fight to prove that he belonged. As he walked back into his house, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point. Not just for him, but for the entire neighborhood. Because the truth was, this wasn't just about one man and one woman. It was about a community, and whether it was willing to confront its biases and embrace change. And as Marcus closed his door behind him, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would this incident force people to reflect and grow? Or would it drive them further apart? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Marcus wasn't going to back down. He had fought too hard to get here, and he wasn't about to let anyone make him feel like he didn't belong. The question was, would the neighborhood rise to the occasion, or would it prove him right? The answer to that question would shape not just Marcus's future, but the future of everyone who called this place home. And as the sun set on what had been one of the most intense days of his life, Marcus couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Because sometimes, it only takes one person to spark a change. And maybe, just maybe, that person was him.